Okay, can you see the slides okay?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. So we are, Pete, Yasi and Rob from the University of Arts London, and we are all open learning designers and part of a team which was established about a year ago. And what we've basically been working on is trying to develop our approach to online distance learning within the university. So as part of this, we have been involved in a research project which took place between February and June this year. And the research was to design, build, deliver and evaluate 15 online short courses. Each of them lasted were designed to last for 3 weeks, and they were unaccredited, but they were based off of modules or units from existing courses. And the participants on the courses signed up for free, although there was a light touch process to screen them and ensure that they had a reasonable level of English and also an understanding of the subject that they were signing up for. So as part of the feedback, the evaluation, we collected feedback from learning and analytics, student survey responses and interviews with the participants. I also want to mention that Dave White, who's the head of digital education at University of Arts London, presented on some of the broader findings on this a couple of months ago, and if you want to see his presentation and find out more, there's a link on the screen there, which we can put in the chat. Right, so as I mentioned, we selected the courses from a range of existing units from across the university. So this included courses from things such as creative computing, creative writing, fine art and animation. The people that signed up for that, just to give you a brief idea of who they were. So there was just over 300. Quite a large number of them were aged between 18 and 24, but we had quite a representative range of ages involved. The majority of them, 92%, identified as female. We had students based across all continents, although 60% of them were located in China. Around about half of them were current students at universities. Only a small percentage were actually from University Arts London, and around a quarter of them were working professionals. So just to explain a little bit more about the focus of the research. So it was to develop our general approach to online learning and teaching, and each of the courses covered answered a question in response to one of these themes. So embodied practice, belonging, access and audience, induction and flexibility. So none of the questions specifically focused on retention, but this was analysed as part of our evaluation. Okay, so hand over to Yasi now.
Thanks so much, Pete. I'll just take control. Amazing. So how did we analyse the retention data? So I'm going to talk a bit about the analysis and how we use the data from each of the different research activities to measure retention. So I'll start by talking a bit about how we define retention for the purposes of the action research. And I think it's important to mention that the research activities were offered for free, and as Pete said, they were unassessed and unaccredited. And so some of the research activities did include a final submission, but because this wasn't consistent across all of them, we didn't use that to measure retention. So in the absence of assessment data, we placed an increased emphasis on retention as a marker for success. And we define retention as students who are logging into Moodle and engaging with the content in the final week. So, sorry if this is really small, but on the screen, we have an example of some of the data that we were able to extrapolate from Moodle. I say we, but this was our colleague Paul who created these amazing scatter plots, I think they're called. And across the x-axis, you can see the date, and on the y-axis, you've got the different students, and each of the different coloured dots represents an interaction or an engagement with Moodle. And I've just highlighted 2 students here. So the bottom one you can see was engaging quite frequently with Moodle across the 3 weeks, and the student above was engaging less frequently, but still was participating in week 3. So was still showing signs of retention according to our definition of retention. This is an example of high retention. So you can see there are lots of students who were still accessing the content in week 3, and the course was Introduction to Screenwriting. And in comparison to that, this is an example of a lower retention course. Again, it's writing activism, so it's a writing course just to show some parallels between the subject areas. And you can see here that there's quite a clear drop-off from week 2, so I've tried to highlight that on the screen there. But you can see after week 2 that the interaction with Moodle significantly declines, and that is why this was an example of a lower retention course. And if we use student retention as a metric for success, that there are some conclusions that we can draw about the learning design elements that made these particular research activities successful. And I'll hand over to Rob to go through that in more detail.
Okay, thanks, Yasi. I'm just going to try and seize control of the slides. There we go. So what we tried to look at was some of the things that the higher retention courses had in common, and I think some of these won't be hugely surprising to some of you, but the characteristics that some of them shared were they were designed to work for all levels. These were open courses, and although some of them were designed at higher levels, they were open to pretty much anybody. It was a very light touch admissions process. So in this context, it seemed to be important that the courses were designed to work for all levels. Chunking and scaffolding seemed to play a significant role in terms of how the courses were structured, and that the content was prepared and was available before the start of the course, so that students had considerable agency over how they approached their studies, when they studied, how long they took. Task briefs, particularly for formative assessment work, allowed students scope to personalise their work. And students had lots of opportunities for one-to-ones and small discussions. That was something, again, that all of the high retention courses had in common, as well as frequent individualised feedback from their tutors on those formative tasks. The other thing was that it was straightforward to access, so students didn't require additional software, they didn't need to download extra things in order to participate in the courses. It was sort of simple and straightforward with familiar technology. We also saw some evidence in some of the lower retention courses sort of to the contrary, so the opposite things applying. So for example, where content was prepared during the course and the schedule of release was perhaps a little bit irregular, that was something we saw in lower retention courses. Where the task briefs were prescriptive and had little scope for creative and personalised work, was also a characteristic we saw on some of the lower retention courses, as well as things where specialist software was required or licenses were required that had complicated registration processes, even if in theory the software was available to the students. And again, I think the fact that these were very short, condensed courses sort of compounds that problem, because you have very little time to kind of work it out and figure it out. Something that all of the lower retention courses had in common was they tended to assume prior knowledge, either of the subject matter or the required technology. The teaching relied a lot on synchronous group discussions, which quite a lot of the participants found it difficult to engage in. In some of the interviews, subsequently, it became clear that that was partly a language issue, with so many students that were not speakers of English or didn't have English as a first language, and didn't have time to sort of get used to studying or learning in English. Quite often the tasks were perhaps too complex or too large for the course duration, so short courses with big tasks is problematic. And again, group feedback rather than individualized feedback. So students had to work harder to apply the feedback to their own situation. And again, there was less opportunity where there were language issues to seek clarification. Because those tasks were often too big, the feedback was quite often designed into the course, but students didn't do the task. The tasks didn't seem appropriate, so they missed out on the feedback. And again, lots of use of discipline-specific terminology, challenging or technical terms, technical readings and texts. Again, we saw the opposite of these. These were common across all of the lower retention courses. And as we've already said, individualized tasks and feedback was something that was common across most of the higher retention courses. That's a real rattle through some of those and that analysis, but we have got just a few final recommendations. So I'll throw back to Pete to pick up on those.
Thank you. So we tried to sort of summarise the findings into 3 sort of headline recommendations. So the first one that we have is to scaffold learning to support the development of knowledge and skills. So, for example, this meant supporting learners with less prior knowledge, who may have different proficiencies in language skills and also around familiarity with subject-specific terminology. And also,
Oh no, has Pete disappeared?
Yeah, I think Pete has disappeared. Yeah.
Oh no. Well, in that case, I'll seize control of the slides again and take you through the last couple of bits. Sorry about that, Pete. Sorry
Thanks,
to miss
Rob.
you at
Thank
the end. So yeah, so
sorry
scaffolding
about
played a really clear role in all of this. Oh, Pete's back. Pete, you can see it. Take control again.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the other point about scaffolding was the way that scaffolding and the use of technologies for students that are less experienced or familiar with them. So the next recommendation is to give students agency and scope to personalise their learning. So, for example, this is things such as making course content available in advance so students can plan ahead and also work at their own pace, and designing activities and briefs to encourage students to bring their own experiences, lives and interests into their work. And then finally, the third recommendation is to ensure that activities offered scope for individualised formative feedback and feed forward. So, for example, including curriculum where students can receive feedback regularly on their work. So this could be for both smaller formative tasks and larger submissions. And also ensuring that feedback is constructive and can inform their future work as well. And that was the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Pete. These slides weren't advancing at the end there. Is there any chance that you could make the slides available to everyone after the event, just so they could have a look? It was really great. There were some really nice recommendations there, and it's really, as Mary said, it's really nice to have this evidence in supporting retention and engagement. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have reached time again, so we've gone slightly over on the time, so we don't have time for questions. But if you do have any questions for everyone, if you could put them in the chat, then I'm sure that Rob, Pete and Yasi will be able to reply to your questions. If not, then we can always get back to you as well. But UAL are doing some really great stuff here, so it's been great to have you guys on and kind of showing that off. So thank you so much. And that was a great recovery there, by the way, as well. So well done.
Thank you.